Dr. Jen stared at her scanner in disbelief. The readings couldn't be right. She tapped the small device with one of her 4 fingers, but the numbers stayed the same. Strange, she whispered to herself. No one else was around to hear her on this empty moon. That was how she liked it. Other Morlaxians were too loud, too quick to judge her work. She moved slowly through the thick forest, her thin blue skin reflecting the purple light of the 2 suns above. The air was hot and wet. Her scanner kept beeping, telling her that something big was moving nearby. Jan stopped and listened. Her large round eyes could see far in the dim light under the trees. Then she heard it, a cracking sound like someone stepping on a branch. She turned quickly and saw movement behind a large rock. Jan held her breath. In her 5 years studying life on this moon, she had never found anything bigger than what Earth people would call a rabbit. "Hello," she called softly, immediately feeling silly. Whatever was there couldn't understand her. The creature stepped out slowly from behind the rock. Jan's mouth fell open. It stood on 2 legs. It had 2 arms. It had pink gold skin with patches of hair on its head and face. It looked at Jan with clear, aware eyes. "Impossible," Jan whispered. The creature was like the pictures she had seen in old books. It looked like a human, but humans were just stories. No one had ever proven they existed. The creature didn't run away. Instead, it watched Jan with what seemed like curiosity. It made a sound, not words, but not just animal noises either. Jan knew she should call her bosses at the Morlaxian Science Authority. This was a huge find. But something stopped her. If she called, they would take over. They would put this creature in a cage. They would do tests. The creature took a step closer to Jan. It was hurt. She could see blood on its leg. It was wearing torn pieces of some material, not like any animal she had studied before. "You're injured," she said gently, though she knew it couldn't understand her. To her surprise, the creature looked down at its leg, then back at her, and nodded. It nodded, as if it understood. Jan made a quick decision. She opened her medical kit and took out a bandage. She pointed to the creature's leg, then to the bandage. The creature watched, then sat down on a rock, extending its injured leg. As Jan carefully wrapped the wound, she noticed more strange things. The creature had 5 fingers, not 4 like most advanced species. Its eyes were fixed on her medical kit with clear interest. When she finished, the creature touched the bandage and made a sound that seemed like thanks. "What are you?" Jan asked. The creature could not answer, of course, but it looked at her with eyes that seemed too smart for a simple animal. Jan checked the time. She had to return to her lab before dark, but she couldn't leave this creature behind. "I should report you," she said, "but I won't. Not yet." She took out some food from her pack and offered it to the creature. It sniffed the food, then ate it carefully. "Son," Jan said suddenly, looking at how the golden light hit the creature's skin. "That's what I'll call you, because of your color." She patted her chest. "Jan." Then she pointed at the creature. "Son." To her amazement, the creature pointed at her and made a sound like Jan. Then it pointed at itself and made a different sound, but Jan couldn't copy it. "Son," she said again, pointing at the creature. After a moment, the creature nodded. Jan made her second big decision of the day. She pointed to her small ship hidden among the trees. "Come with me, son," she said. "I want to learn more about you." Son looked at her, then at the ship, then back at the forest. For a moment, Jan thought he would run away. Instead, he stood and limped toward her. As they walked to her ship, Jan felt both excited and afraid. She was breaking at least 5 rules by taking this creature, but something about Sun made her think this was no ordinary animal. This could change everything she knew about life in the galaxy. Jan's lab was small but clean. It was part of a bigger research station, but she had her own space away from the other scientists. That was good now that she had Sun. "This is your new home," she told Sun as she led him inside. For now, at least. Sun looked around the room with wide eyes. He touched the smooth walls, the blinking machines, the soft light panels on the ceiling. He moved carefully, like he was trying not to break anything. Jian set up a small bed in the corner of her lab. She gave Sun water in a bowl, and some food that she thought might be safe for him to eat. He sniffed each item before trying it. "You're very careful," Jan said. "Smart." That night, she wrote in her research log, *Day 1. The creature I've named Sun shows remarkable awareness. He is bipedal, has opposable thumbs, and displays curiosity about his surroundings. He seems to understand that I am helping him. His wound is not serious. I will begin tests tomorrow to learn more about his species. 3 days passed. Sun's leg got better quickly. John was surprised by how fast he learned things. He watched her work, his eyes following her hands. When she gave him a simple puzzle box with food inside, he solved it in minutes. On the 4th day, something amazing happened. Jan left her tablet on the table while she went to get food. When she came back, Sun was touching the screen. He had opened her star map program. "How did you do that?" she asked, shocked. Sun looked at her, then back at the screen. He touched one star system, then another. His fingers moved with purpose, not just random tapping. Jan moved closer. "You know what this is?" Sun made a sound, then pointed to himself, then to the stars. A chill ran through John's body. Was he trying to tell her something about the stars? About where he came from? Before she could think more about it, her door buzzed. She quickly turned off the tablet and motioned for Sun to go to his corner bed. Dr. Tai entered without waiting for Jian to answer. He was tall for a Morlaxian, with dark green skin and sharp eyes. "Jian, you missed the weekly meeting again," he said. Then he stopped, his nose twitching. "What's that smell?" Jian moved to block his view of the corner. "Just a new sample. A plant from the eastern forest." Ta looked doubtful. "It doesn't smell like a plant." He took a step forward. Sun made a small noise. Ta's eyes widened. "What was that?" "Jan, what are you hiding?" Jan knew she couldn't lie anymore. She stepped aside. Ta gasped when he saw Sun, who was sitting calmly on his bed, watching them. "By the stars. Is that what I think it is?" Ta moved closer to Sun, his scientific curiosity overcoming his shock. "His name is Sun," Jan said. "I found him injured in the forest. He's very intelligent." "This is against every rule, Jan. This is a sentient being. You can't just keep it here like a pet." "He's not a pet," Jan said. "He's a research subject, and I'm learning amazing things about him." Ta shook his head. "You need to report this. The authority needs to know." "They'll take him away," Jan said. "They'll put him in a cage, run tests. I can learn more if he trusts me." Ta looked at Sun, who was now standing, his eyes moving between the two aliens as if he understood their argument. "1 week, Ta finally said. "I'll give you 1 week to learn what you can. Then we tell the authority, together." After Tai left, Jan sat down next to Sun. "I'm sorry about that." Sun surprised her by patting her hand with his. The gesture was so gentle, so understanding. It was not something a simple animal would do. That night, Jan couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about how Sun had touched the star map, how he looked at her equipment not with fear, but with recognition. "What are you?" she whispered in the darkness. "Where did you come from?" In his corner, Sun watched the stars through the small window, his eyes reflecting the distant light of worlds Jan had never visited. 3 weeks passed. Jan kept detailed notes on Sun every day. She wrote down everything he did, what he ate, how he slept. The more she watched him, the more confused she became. Sun was too smart. He learned to open all the containers in the lab. He figured out how the light switches worked. He even tried to help Jun with her work by handing her tools before she asked for them. "You're full of surprises," Jian told Sun one evening as they shared a meal. She had learned he could eat most of the same food she did. Sun made a sound that almost seemed like a laugh. That night, Jian couldn't sleep again. She kept thinking about Ta's warning. Her week was almost up. Soon, she would have to tell the authority about Sun. In the morning, Jian found something strange. Her star charts, the paper ones she kept in a drawer, were laid out on the floor. They were not in a mess. They were arranged in a pattern. Sun sat next to them, watching her reaction. "Did you do this?" Jian asked. Sun nodded. He pointed to one chart, then to himself. Jian's heart beat faster. "Are you trying to tell me something?" For lunch, Jian gave Sun some round fruits and dried meat. Instead of eating right away, Sun arranged the food on his plate. He put the round fruits in a circle, with some in the middle. He broke the meat into small pieces and placed them in a pattern around the fruits. Jian gasped. It looked like a solar system model. "Sun," she said slowly, "are you showing me a solar system?" Sun nodded. He pointed to one of the outer pieces of meat, then to himself again. Jian's mind raced. Was he trying to tell her where he came from? But that would mean. She grabbed her tablet and opened the star map program. Sun moved quickly to her side, more excited than she had ever seen him. Jian showed him the known star systems. Sun studied the map, then touched one star in the outer regions, near where Jian had found him. He made a sound more complex than his usual noises. "Is that your home?" Jian asked. Sun shook his head. He made a motion with his hands, like something exploding, then pointed to himself and then to the ground. "You fell. You crashed here." Sun nodded eagerly. Jian sat down hard on her chair. This couldn't be happening. If Sun came from another planet, if he traveled through space. "But you look so simple," she said. "Your technology must be very advanced, but you don't even wear clothes except those rags." Sun looked sad. He touched his head, then made a downward motion with his hand. Before Jian could figure out what he meant, the lab door opened. Dr. Ta walked in with another Morlaxian she didn't recognize. "Time's up, Jian," Ta said. "This is Dr. Kun from the authority. I told him about your discovery." Dr. Kun was older, with pale blue skin and cold eyes. He stared at Sun with scientific interest, but no warmth. "Remarkable," he said. "A bipedal mammal with apparent intelligence. Where did you find it?" "His name is Sun," Jian said firmly. "And he's not just intelligent. He's trying to communicate." Dr. Kun raised an eyebrow. "Communication? Like an animal learns tricks?" "No," Jian said. "Like a person. I think he might be from another planet." Dr. Kun laughed. "That's absurd. Look at it. It's clearly a primitive species." Sun watched them talking. His eyes moved from speaker to speaker. Then, to everyone's shock, he walked to John's tablet, picked it up, and opened the star map again. The room fell silent as Sun touched stars on the map with clear purpose. He wasn't just tapping randomly. He was navigating the map. "That's impossible," Dr. Kun whispered. Sun looked at the three Morlaxians. Then he did something that changed everything. He pointed to the stars, then to himself, and made a sound that sounded almost like a word. "Home." Jian, Tai, and Dr. Kun stared at Sun in stunned silence. "I think," Jian said slowly, "we need to reconsider what, or who, Sun really is." After Sun's surprising word, Dr. Kun wanted to take him to the main research center. Jian fought against this. "He trusts me," she said. "I should be the one to work with him." "This is too important for one scientist," Dr. Kun argued. Ta stepped in. "Jian has already built a relationship with him. If you take him away, he might stop communicating." Dr. Kun wasn't happy, but he agreed. "You have 2 weeks to show progress. I will send equipment to help." The next day, Jian received a new communication device. It could translate simple ideas into pictures. She hoped it would help Sun express himself. "Let's try this," she told Sun, showing him the device. "It might help us talk to each other." Sun looked at the device with clear interest. Jan showed him how to use it. She touched a picture of food, and the device said food out loud. Sun caught on quickly. Soon he was using the device to point at basic things. Water, sleep, door. Jan was pleased but not surprised. She already knew Sun was smart. What surprised her was when Sun started combining pictures to make new meanings. He touched the picture of a ship, then the picture of broken, then pointed to himself. "Ship broken. You." John asked. "Your ship is broken." Sun nodded hard. He seemed excited that she understood. Over the next few days, they worked for hours with the device. Jan added more pictures to help Sun communicate. She was amazed at how quick he was to learn. Dr. Kun visited every other day. He watched their progress with doubt. "This proves nothing," he said. "It's just like teaching a pet animal tricks." Jan disagreed. "He's not just responding to pictures. He's creating new meanings. He's thinking." One night, after a long day of work, Jan fell asleep at her desk. She woke up hours later to a strange sound. Sun was sitting on the floor with the communication device, pressing pictures over and over. Jan watched silently. Sun didn't know she was awake. He seemed frustrated, touching pictures and shaking his head. Then, Sun did something unexpected. He turned the device over and opened the back panel. Inside were the wires and chips that made it work. With careful fingers, Sun began to rearrange them. "Sun, stop," Jan said, jumping up. "You'll break it." Sun looked at her calmly. He turned the device back over and pressed a picture. Instead of the usual simple words, the device spoke a full sentence. "I need to tell you something important." Jan's mouth fell open. "How did you do that?" Sun pressed more pictures. The device spoke again. "I am not animal. I am human. I come from far away." Jan sat down slowly. "Human. But humans are just stories." Sun shook his head. He used the device again. "Humans real. I am Commander Chunno. My ship crashed. I am changing. Getting simpler. Help me." Jan couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You're a space commander, but you look so primitive." Sun, or Juno, nodded sadly. He pressed more pictures. "Something happened to me. Body changing. Mind changing slower. Soon I will forget everything." Jan's scientific mind raced with questions. "How is this possible? What happened to you?" Junho used the device one more time before it sparked and went silent. "Human. Home. Far." The device had burned out. Junho had pushed it beyond its limits to communicate. Jan sat in silence for a long time, looking at Junho. He looked back at her with eyes full of intelligence and sadness. "I believe you," Jan finally said. "And I will help you." She didn't know how, but she knew she had to try. This wasn't just about science anymore. This was about helping someone find their way home. Junho smiled. It was the first time Jan had seen him do that. Even with his primitive features, his smile was full of hope. Jan made a decision. She would not tell Dr. Kun everything. Not yet. First, she needed to understand what had happened to Junho. And she needed to find a way to stop whatever was changing him. Jan worked through the night to fix the communication device. By morning, she had made it work again, but it was not as good as before. Junho would need to use simpler messages now. "I need to know more," Jan told him as they ate breakfast. "What happened to you? Why are you changing?" Junho used the device to show pictures, space, danger, light, then pointed to himself and made a downward motion. "Something in space changed you?" Jan asked. Junho nodded. He pointed to his head, then his body, and made the downward motion again. "Your mind and body are going backward," Jan said, understanding. "You're de-evolving." Junho's eyes lit up. He nodded hard. Jan took out her tablet and showed Junho pictures of different human-like creatures, from most primitive to most advanced. She had studied these in school. Most scientists thought they were just stories, but she had always been interested in them. Junho pointed to the most advanced one, a modern human. Then he pointed to himself, then to a more primitive version halfway down the line. "You were like this," Jan said, pointing to the modern human. "But now you're becoming like this." She pointed to the primitive one. Junho nodded sadly. "How fast is it happening?" Jan asked. Junho held up his hands and showed 10 fingers, then 8, then 5. 10 days ago you had more advanced features, and in 5 more days. Junho pointed to an even more primitive picture. Jan felt sick. Something was making Junho go backward in evolution, losing his advanced human features. If it continued, he would become more and more primitive until he was just like an animal. "We need to stop this," she said firmly. Dr. Ta came to the lab later that day. Jan told him what she had learned, but made him promise not to tell Dr. Kun yet. "This is incredible," Ta said, looking at Junho with new eyes. "If what you say is true, then humans really did explore space. They're not just legends." Junho used the device to show more pictures. Many humans, many ships, many stars. "A whole civilization," Ta whispered. "But what happened to them?" Junho seemed frustrated by the limited pictures on the device. He walked to John's desk and picked up a pen. On a blank paper, he started to draw. His drawing was simple but clear. It showed a ship near what looked like a dark cloud in space. Then the ship breaking apart, then smaller ships landing on different planets. "Your ship was destroyed by something in space," Jan said, "and the survivors landed on different planets." Junho nodded. He drew more. People on planets, looking more and more primitive as time passed. "The same thing that happened to you happened to all of them," Ta said. "They all started to de-evolve." Junho drew another picture, a map of stars with many X marks on it. "Were you looking for the lost humans?" John asked. "Is that why you were in this part of space?" Junho nodded, his eyes sad. "And then the same thing happened to you," Ta said. "The same thing that made the others change." Junho pointed to his head and made a circular motion. "Your mind is going around in circles," John guessed. Junho shook his head. He pointed to his head, then made a motion like time passing. "Your mind is changing more slowly than your body," Ta suggested. Junho nodded eagerly. "That's why you can still communicate and think clearly, even though your body looks primitive," Jan said. "But your mind will change too, won't it?" Junho nodded again, his face serious. Jan looked at the calendar on her wall. Dr. Kun would be back in 3 days to check on their progress. She had promised to help Junho, but she didn't know how to stop something she didn't understand. "We need to find your ship," she said suddenly. "There might be something there that can help us understand what's happening to you." Junho's eyes widened. He pointed to the window, toward the forest where Jan had found him. "Yes," Jan said. "We'll go back there. We'll find your ship." She turned to Ta. "Will you help us?" Ta looked uncertain. "This is dangerous, Jan. If the authority finds out." "Please," Jan said. "This isn't just about science anymore." Ta looked at Junho, who was watching them with intelligent, hopeful eyes. "All right," Ta finally said. "When do we leave?" The next morning, Jan and Ta prepared for their trip to find Junho's ship. They packed food, water, and tools. They told no one where they were going. "If Dr. Kun asks, I'll say we're collecting samples," Ta said. Junho watched them pack. He seemed nervous but ready. When Jan showed him the map of where she had found him, he pointed to an area deeper in the forest. "Is that where your ship is?" she asked. Junho nodded. On a piece of paper, he drew a small ship half buried in the ground. "It will be hard to find if it's buried," Ta said. Junho pointed to himself, then to the forest. He would lead them there. They left early, while most of the research station was still quiet. John's small transport ship could carry all three of them. As they flew low over the forest, Shunho looked out the window, searching for landmarks. After an hour, he tapped Jan's arm and pointed down. She landed the ship in a small clearing. From there, they would walk. The forest was thick and hot. Junho moved with confidence, like he remembered the way. Ta used a device to mark their path so they could find their way back. How far? Jan asked after they had walked for a long time. Shunho held up 2 fingers. 2 hours, Ta guessed. Shunho nodded. As they walked, Jan asked questions about humans. She used simple words and the communication device to help. Were there many humans in space? Shunho made a wide gesture with his arms, meaning many. How long ago? Shunho showed his hands many times, each time meaning 100 years. Hundreds of years ago, Jan said, amazed. Long before Morlaxians ever traveled in space. Shunho nodded. He used the device to show pictures, humans, stars, then a dark cloud, then humans on different planets. The humans spread across many star systems. Ta said. Then something happened, this dark cloud. After that, humans were trapped on different planets. Shunho nodded again. He pointed to the next picture, the dark cloud spreading. The dark cloud affected more and more star systems, Jan said. And it made humans go backward, de-evolve. Shunho tapped his head, then made a motion like something expanding. It affected their minds first. Tai asked. Shunho nodded. He made a motion like forgetting, then pointed to tools, ships, and technology pictures. They forgot how to use their technology, Jan realized. They forgot everything they knew about space travel and science. Shunho looked sad. He pointed to the picture of many humans, then made a downward motion. A whole civilization lost, Ta said quietly, going back to primitive states. They walked in silence for a while, each lost in thought. The idea of an entire advanced species forgetting their knowledge and physically changing was both fascinating and terrifying to the Morlaxian scientists. Finally, they reached a part of the forest that looked different. The trees were broken and burned. The ground was torn up. This is it, Jan said. This is where you crashed. Shunho nodded. He pointed ahead, where something metal glinted between the trees. They hurried forward and found what was left of Shunho's ship. It was small, just big enough for one person. Half of it was buried in the ground. The other half was crushed. It's so small, Ta said. Where's the rest of your ship? Shunho drew in the dirt. A big ship, then smaller ships leaving it. This was an escape pod, Jan guessed. Your main ship was affected by something in space. You tried to escape. Shunho nodded. He pointed up, then made an explosion gesture. Your main ship was destroyed, Ta said. And you crashed here. Shunho led them into what was left of his small ship. Inside there were broken screens and controls. Most of them no longer worked, but Shunho knew what he was looking for. He pressed a hidden button under a broken panel. A small compartment opened. Inside was a flat, silver device. Shunho handed it to John. When she touched it, it lit up with a soft blue light. Strange symbols appeared on its surface. What is it? She asked. Shunho pointed to the symbols, then to his head, then made an upward motion, the opposite of the downward motion he had used before. Jan's eyes widened. Can this reverse what's happening to you? Shunho's eyes filled with hope. He nodded. Jan held the silver device carefully as they made their way back through the forest. Hope made them walk faster, but Shunho was getting tired more easily. Jan noticed he was moving differently, more hunched over. He's changing more, she whispered to Ta while Shunho walked ahead. The de-evolution is speeding up. Ta nodded. We need to hurry. When they reached the lab, Jan locked the door. She didn't want Dr. Kun to surprise them. She gave the silver device back to Junho. "How does it work?" she asked. Junho looked at the device with frustration. He pressed different symbols, but nothing happened. He tried again and again, but the device only glowed softly. "What's wrong?" Tai asked. Junho made a motion like something was missing. He drew a picture of the device, then another similar device next to it. "You need 2 of these," Jian guessed. Junho shook his head. He drew a bigger picture. The device, connected to a larger machine. "This is just part of something bigger," Ta said. "It needs to connect to another machine." Junho nodded. He pointed to the broken communication device, then to John's lab equipment, then to the silver device. "You want us to connect this to our technology?" John asked. Junho nodded eagerly. Jan and Ta looked at each other. This would be difficult. Human technology was very different from Morlaxian technology. "I don't know if we can do this," Ta said. Junho's face fell. He made a motion like time passing, then pointed to himself, then to a picture of a very primitive human-like creature. "We have to try," Jan said firmly. "If we don't, he will keep changing until his mind is gone too." They worked through the night. Jan used all her knowledge of technology to try to connect the silver device to her lab equipment. Tai helped, but they kept hitting problems. "The systems aren't compatible," Ta said, rubbing his tired eyes. "We need someone who knows more about this." Jan thought hard. "Dr. Han," she said suddenly. "He studies old technology. Maybe he can help." "Dr. Han." Ta looked shocked. He was thrown out of the authority 3 years ago. Dr. Kun would never approve. "We don't need Dr. Kun's approval," Jan said. "We need help." Early the next morning, Jan went to find Dr. Han. He lived alone in a small house at the edge of the research station. People said he was strange and did forbidden experiments. Dr. Han was surprised to see Jian at his door. "Dr. Jian, what brings you here?" "I need your help," Jian said. "It's about alien technology." Dr. Han's eyes lit up with interest. "Come in." Jian told him about Junho and the silver device. She didn't tell him everything, just that she had found a strange creature and a piece of technology she couldn't understand. "Take me to your lab," Dr. Han said. When they arrived, Dr. Han's eyes widened at the sight of Junho. "This is no ordinary creature," he said immediately. "No," Jan admitted. "He's a human, a space traveler, and he's de-evolving." Dr. Han didn't look surprised. "I've seen this before," he said quietly. "What?" Jan and Tai said together. 5 years ago, I found a similar creature," Dr. Han explained. "It was already too far gone, almost animal-like. I tried to help it, but I couldn't. That's why I started studying old technologies. I knew there was more to the universe than the authority wanted to admit." Dr. Han examined the silver device. "This is a genetic stabilizer," he said. "It's designed to stop genetic regression. But it needs more power than your lab can provide." "So we can't help him?" Jan asked, her heart sinking. "I didn't say that," Dr. Han replied. "We need to get him to my lab. I've built equipment that might work." Suddenly, Junho made a noise. He pointed to his head, then made a confused gesture. "What's wrong?" John asked. Junho tried to write something, but his hand was shaking. The letters were messy, but Jan could read them. "Forgetting. His mind is starting to go," Dr. Han said urgently. "We're running out of time." Jan looked at Junho, whose eyes now showed fear and confusion. "How much time do we have?" "Days," Dr. Han said. "Maybe less." "Then we go now," Jan decided. "Tai, can you keep Dr. Kun away if he comes?" Ta nodded. "I'll tell him you're sick." Jan and Dr. Han helped Junho to stand. He was weaker than he had been that morning. "Hold on," Jan told him. "We're going to help you." Junho looked at her. For a moment, his eyes cleared. He nodded once. They had to move quickly. The race against time had begun. Dr. Han's lab was hidden underground, beneath his small house. It was bigger than Jan expected, filled with strange machines and blinking lights. "I've been preparing for this," Dr. Han said as they helped Juno onto a bed. "Ever since I found that other human." Jan connected the silver device to Dr. Han's equipment. Lights flickered, and the device hummed with energy. "It's working," she said, "but I don't know what to do next." Dr. Han studied the symbols on the device. "These are instructions," he said, "but we need more information. There should be a medical database on his ship." Jian frowned. "The ship is mostly destroyed. The main computer might still work." Dr. Han said, "We need to go back." Chunho made a noise. He was trying to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he drew a picture. The ship with an arrow pointing to a specific part. "The computer is there," Jian said, "and it might still work." Dr. Han nodded. "I'll stay here and keep Chunho stable. You need to go back to the ship." Jan looked at Chunho. He was getting worse. His eyes were less clear, and his movements were jerky. "I'll go," she said, "but I need help." "I'll go with you," a voice said from the doorway. It was Ta. "Dr. Kun came looking for you. I told him you were sick, but he won't believe that for long." Together, Jan and Tai prepared for another trip to the crashed ship. They took tools, lights, and data storage devices. "Be careful," Dr. Han warned. "The authority has increased patrols in the forest. They might be looking for more evidence of alien life." Jan and Tai took a different path to the crash site. It was longer but safer. As they walked, Jan thought about how much had changed in just a few days. She had found what she thought was a simple animal, and now she was fighting to save an advanced being from another world. "What if we can't help him?" Tai asked as they walked. "We have to," Jan said. "He came here looking for his lost people. We can't let him become lost too." They reached the crash site by evening. The ship looked even more broken than before. They used their tools to open the damaged computer panel that Chunho had shown in his drawing. "It's still here," Jan said, pulling out a small black box. "This must be the computer core." Tai checked their scanner. "We need to hurry. There's a patrol coming this way." They started back toward Dr. Han's lab, moving as fast as they could through the dark forest. The patrol was getting closer. "We need to hide," Ta whispered. They ducked behind large trees as lights swept through the forest. Jan held her breath. If they were caught with alien technology, they would be in serious trouble. As the patrol passed by, Jan noticed something strange. There were shapes moving in the darkness, following the patrol. They were human-like, but smaller and more primitive than Hyuno. "Look," she whispered to Ta. "There are more humans here." The shapes moved silently through the trees. One of them turned and looked directly at Jan and Ta. Its eyes glinted in the dark. "They're protecting us," Ta said in amazement. "They're keeping the patrol away from us." The patrol moved in a different direction, following false sounds made by the primitive humans. Jan and Ta continued their journey. Chunho said there were survivors from his ship, Jan remembered. Maybe those are them, already changed by the same thing that's affecting him. They reached Dr. Han's lab just before dawn. Dr. Han was working frantically over Chunho, who was now barely conscious. "Did you find it?" Dr. Han asked. Jan handed him the black box. "Yes, and we found more humans in the forest. They helped us escape a patrol." Dr. Han connected the box to his equipment. Lights flashed, and screens filled with strange symbols. "This is it," he said. "The medical database. Now we can understand how to use the genetic stabilizer." Chunho made a noise. His eyes opened slightly. He looked at the screens and smiled weakly. "We're going to help you," Jan told him. "Just hold on a little longer." But as Dr. Han worked to decode the database, a loud alarm sounded from above. "Someone's at my door," Dr. Han said, his face pale. "It's the authority." They found us. Hide everything, Dr. Han said. Quickly, Jian and Tai hurried to cover the equipment. Dr. Han helped Huno into a small side room. Keep working on the database, Jian told Dr. Han. I'll handle the authority. Jian went upstairs to the door. Dr. Kun stood there with 2 security officers. Dr. Jen, he said coldly, you missed our meeting, and Dr. Ta has been lying about your whereabouts. I've been sick, Jan said, trying to sound weak. Dr. Kun pushed past her. We know you're hiding something. The strange creature you found has disappeared, and our sensors detect unusual energy readings from this house. The security officers started searching the house. John's heart beat fast. They would find the underground lab soon. Suddenly, there was a loud crash outside. Everyone turned to look. A group of primitive humans stood in the clearing, watching the house. They had broken branches and made noise to get attention. What are those? Dr. Kun asked, shocked. The security officers moved toward the door, their weapons ready. The primitive humans scattered into the forest. After them, Dr. Kun ordered, we need specimens. The officers ran into the forest, chasing the humans. Dr. Kun turned back to John. You know something about this, he said. Tell me what's happening. Before Jan could answer, there was a sound from below. Dr. Kun followed the noise and found the entrance to the underground lab. What is this? He demanded as he went down the stairs. In the lab, Tai and Dr. Han stood protectively in front of the equipment and the room where Junho was hidden. This is private research, Dr. Han said. Dr. Kun ignored him. You're all breaking regulations. I'll have you removed from the authority. Then something unexpected happened. Junho walked out of the hidden room. But he looked different. He stood straighter. His eyes were clear. He wore a piece of the silver device on his chest. Hello, Junho said in perfect Morlaxian language. I am Commander Junho of the Earth Exploration Fleet. Dr. Kun stepped back, shocked. It can speak. Jun corrected. He can speak, and he has much to tell you. In the next hour, Junho explained everything to Dr. Kun. He talked about the human civilization that had spread across many star systems long ago. He explained how the Great Dispersion, a cosmic wave of energy, had caused human DNA to become unstable, making them de-evolve. He had been part of a mission to find lost human colonies and help them. The device stabilized my DNA, Junho said. Dr. Han and Jen saved me just in time. Dr. Kun listened with growing interest. His anger turned to scientific curiosity. This changes everything we know about space, he said finally. If humans were traveling between stars before us, there could be many lost colonies out there. That's what I was trying to find, Junho said. My people need help. Dr. Kun made a decision. The authority needs to know about this, but not as a capture mission, as a first contact. 1 year later, Jan stood on the deck of the first Morlaxian human joint science vessel. Next to her was Junho, now fully stable thanks to the genetic treatment they had developed together. I never thought I'd be going back to Earth, Junho said. I had almost forgotten it existed. I never thought I'd leave my lab, Jan said with a smile. Now look at us. The ship was headed to Earth, where the remaining advanced human outposts had been contacted. Together, Morlaxians and humans were working to find all the lost human colonies and help them. Dr. Kun had become the head of the new Department of Interspecies Relations. Dr. Han was leading the genetic research team. Tai was training new scientists in human Morlaxian cooperation. And Jian, she was no longer the shy scientist who worked alone. She was Junho's partner in the greatest scientific mission of her time. It's strange to think this all started because I thought you were a pet, Jan said. Junho laughed. And I thought you were a strange blue alien who might eat me. They watched as the stars streaked by the window. Ahead was a new future for both their species. Thank you for not giving up on me, Junho said quietly. I never would, Jan replied. That's what friends do. As Earth came into view, A blue dot in the distance, John thought about how much had changed. A chance meeting in a forest had led to the greatest discovery in Morlaxian history. And it had all begun with a shy alien scientist and her unusual pet.